Hello everyone. We want to talk about another topic related to color, which is color vision deficiency. Color vision deficiency, or CVD, is commonly referred to as color blindness. Worldwide, 8 to 10% of men have this deficiency, and in women it is much less. It is about 0.5%. We want to understand what CVD is and how the affected people see the world. Then we learn methods to make visualizations more accessible by making them colorblind friendly. Color blindness is a genetic condition that only rarely occurs in women but affects 1 of every 10 men to some degree. People with color blindness have trouble telling two colors from one another. For example, to someone with red or green blindness, these 3 types of apples look like they are almost the same color. You probably know about photoreceptors in the back of our eyes. We have 2 types, rods and cones. Rods are responsible for night vision. Cones, on the other hand, are responsible for color vision and daylight vision. In normal color vision, the eye has all 3 types of cones. Each type of cones responds to a different wavelength. The short or S cones are more sensitive to blue colors. The medium cones or M cones are more sensitive to green colors. And the long cones or L cones are more sensitive to red colors. When one type of cone is missing, then a person is red blind or green blind, depending on if it's an L cone or an M cone that's missing. If the person has all 3 types of cones and still has color vision deficiency, then he's either red weak or green weak, depending on the type of cones that are defective. Both the L and M cones are coded to the X chromosome. Women have 2 X chromosomes, and so they must have defects in both chromosomes before they exhibit color blindness. So they can often overcome it. Men, on the other hand, only have 1 X chromosome, and therefore they are more often affected by color blindness. Again, approximately 8 to 10% of men are colorblind, and less than 0.5% of women are colorblind. At 10% prevalence, it doesn't take many men in a room to have someone that suffers from color vision deficiency. This becomes a much bigger issue in large organizations or where visualizations are created for the general public. Also, it is worth mentioning that color blindness usually affects both eyes equally and remains stable throughout life. Here I'm showing how people that are red blind perceive the color red much darker, and therefore they cannot tell red and green apart. And here I'm showing how in green blind people medium wavelength sensitivity is lost, and as a result they perceive the color green as reddish, and therefore just like red blind people, they cannot tell red and green apart. It is worthy of attention that a green blind person can only distinguish 2 to 3 different color hues, whereas somebody with normal vision sees 7 different hues. Green weakness is the most common form of CVD, and it refers to everything between normal color vision and this. This is an example of traffic light colors in a table where there is no other accommodation for someone with CVD. And here is how someone with deuteranopia or green blindness sees this table. As you can see, for green blind individuals, it is impossible to tell the difference between most of the green and red squares. Now, let's talk about how we can make it better for people with CVD and accommodate them to some extent. This is called a color wheel. This is actually based on a subtractive color model. The primary colors are R, Y, B, meaning red, yellow, and blue. The secondary colors are green, orange, and purple, which are created by mixing two of the primary colors. And there are 6 tertiary colors which are created by mixing the primary and secondary colors together. This is a variation of the color wheel. Colors across from each other are complementary colors, and colors next to each other are analogous colors. If we go back to the color wheel, we see that green and red are opposite of each other. So what many data visualization designers will do is to turn the color wheel clockwise, so blue is at the top and orange is at the bottom. This way, instead of green for good, they use blue for good, and instead of red for bad, they use orange for bad. The color combination could also be blue and red because it's the blue color that's the most friendly to almost all people with CVD. VizCheck is an online simulator showing how things look like to someone who is colorblind. There are in fact many other online colorblind simulators. As we mentioned, the most common problem for colorblind people that we hear all the time is the usage of red and green at the same time. So we should be mindful of that in data visualization, and we should not use red and green together because it troubles people with color blindness. Here in this chart, as you see, we have a problem going on. We have the red, which is showing something really bad, and we have this dark green, which is showing something really good. Over here, this is how a red blind person sees the left chart. Here, if we want to try and make the same comparison, it is a lot harder to contrast this with this. So we may think both of these are good. So this is a bad chart, not for the poor design of it, but for the poor color choice of it, because this is not accessible to a lot of people. Here is a close-up of the protanopia or red blindness simulation chart from the last slide. It is impossible to tell the difference between the red and the dark green, so we should revise the colors. Here is the same visualization using a colorblind friendly palette. Tableau has this colorblind friendly palette built into the software, and the colors used here are very similar to Tableau's colors. So instead of green for good, we used blue for good, and instead of red for bad, we used orange for bad. As you can see, this is easy to see for someone with red blindness. The blue is easy to see because it's not impacted by color blindness, and orange turns into a shade of brown, which is easily distinguishable from the blue, as you can see here. This visualization is a great example of using Tableau's colorblind friendly palette. The graphs showed the rates of 5 sexually transmitted diseases or STDs in 3 counties in Texas as a trend over time. In this visualization, orange indicates higher STD rates, which is bad, and blue indicates lower STD rates, which is good. As you might have noticed, we used a diverging color scheme because the STD rates may go up or they may go down. This diverging color scheme that we used here works very well, and it is colorblind friendly. This is another visualization, this time showing survey data on a Likert scale. The designer of the visualization used orange, gray, and blue to create excellent contrast between the colors, even for someone with CVD. The Likert scale is a multi-point scale which is used to allow the individuals to express how much they agree or disagree with a particular statement. In this specific example, about their economic situation. Keep in mind that it's not just red and green that we should avoid to accommodate people with color blindness. People in the data visualization community tend to discuss red and green more than other colors, probably because the traffic light colors are still prevalent in visualization software. Instead of saying don't use red and green, it would be more accurate to say don't use two colors from red, green, orange, and brown colors at the same time. In this example, there is no red, but the colors green, orange, and brown appear to be the same color as you can see here under red blindness simulation. There are also concerns with other colors. For example, this purple and hot pink colors are problematic with gray colors under CVD simulation, as you can see here. Purple, hot pink, and gray. They can easily be confused. In general, blue/orange is a common colorblind friendly palette, as we showed in a couple of examples, so it is much better to use that for this example. Here is a standard traffic light color palette, and this is a green blind simulation of it. If you are using the traffic light colors like this, be sure to provide the audience with some other accommodation to the data so that people with CVD will be able to read and understand the use of color in your visualization. Instead of providing other accommodation for your data, you can actually leverage light and dark colors. You can make the red very dark and the green very light, or vice versa. People with CVD can typically tell the difference between light and dark colors. So by making the red a deep dark red like this and the green on the lighter side like this, it becomes easy for someone with color blindness to contrast between these two. If you have the ability to change the colors even more, try adding some blue to the green color. This adds further contrast between the green and the red, as you can see here. This way, you have used the traffic light colors that your manager or company executives wanted you to, and at the same time, you have accommodated people with CVD. This is a great example of a chart that originally wouldn't work well at all for someone with CVD. However, we took advantage of the color scheme in the previous slide with dark red and light green with a hint of blue. Now, people with CVD can clearly see the contrast between the top bars and the bottom bars. And these charts from graphjam.com show why pie charts are not a reasonable choice when we have people with CVD in our audience. If the slices were red, green, orange, and brown, the charts might actually look very similar to these with just one single color. Now, let's look at some charts and criticize them. Here we are using 4 different colors for the same type of data. Let's say this is sales in 4 different months. There are 2 problems with this. Number 1, we do not need multiple colors. Number 2, colors that we chose are not colorblind friendly. For example, we have green and red being used together. Here we are using 2 different colors, but we should have used a different shade of the same color. That will make the chart simpler and also colorblind friendly, because we will no longer have green and red together. Here we want to highlight one of the bars, which is this one. This chart is colorblind friendly. However, we can make it simpler by using a different shade of blue for this bar that we want to highlight instead of using a totally different color. Here are the corrected versions of the charts in the previous slide. Note that they are simpler and none of them has more than one color. So we do not need to worry about colorblind friendliness in these corrected charts. Here we want to wrap up our discussion by going over 3 pieces of advice to make our data visualizations colorblind friendly. The more colors we use, the harder it will be to tell them apart. That's true for all our audiences, but more likely for our colorblind ones. In this example, we are converting this pie chart with 6 different colors to this bar chart with just one color. In general, rainbow color schemes, which are also called spectral color schemes, may look exciting. However, they usually do more harm than good. This is extra reason that we should use fewer colors. There are several resources that help us choose a colorblind friendly palette for our visualizations. Tableau has always had a colorblind palette. Also, there are online tools such as Color Brewer and Coolors, which provide palettes that are colorblind friendly. Furthermore, there is an increasing number of simulators in the form of apps, websites, and browser extensions that check the colors of our visualizations and make sure that our visualizations are colorblind friendly. Another advice is that we should not solely rely on colors. We can add textures, labels, shapes, etc. to our visualization. Here is an example of a map in which we are using textures in addition to colors. A colorblind person can easily tell apart these 2 different textures despite the fact that the colors are red and green and are hard to distinguish for the colorblind. Great. In the next lecture, we'll talk about optical illusions and how they can negatively impact visualization of data.